There's a video about a product that I put out years ago now. There was a video that went with it. There was like a downloadable thing that went with it, and an ebook that went with it that was called Thug Jitsu and Intelligent Asymmetric Approaches to Violence. The idea behind the whole Thug Jitsu thing was it was like an NLP reframe. It was to try and get into the core problem that people who are self-practitioners, self-protection practitioners face, which is how do you behave in a way that is violent and effective but still remain within the confines of the law? How do you deal with the double bind that society places you in, that civilization places you in, where you say, okay, you cannot be violent. Violence, you don't own violence anymore. Violence is owned by the government, it's owned by the state, and it's owned by our state-mandated military and state-mandated police. You don't own it anymore, but you are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to defend yourself if you're violently attacked, as long as you use a reasonable level of force. I would consider that to be a bit of a double bind. I would consider that to be, at the very least, if not a full-blown catch-22, you are receiving two disparate levels of communication that are going to take you in two different directions. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. I think a lot of people who are drawn to self-protection, that's a core moral, philosophical, legal issue that you're dealing with, that you're struggling with, and trying to find an answer for. And it's not easy, because if you're going to apply violence in a way that works, and a way that differentiates you from self-defense, as in, I'm saying self-defense in inverted commas, as in the self-defense courses that would be taught at your local municipal sports hall. Stay back, yeah, and then kick to the groin. You know, that kind of thing, that people who are into self-protection and they're into the combatives community, they know that stuff isn't going to cut it. It's not going to work. You know, when the shit hits the fan, the level of violence that you're going to have to apply is going to have to be quite a few degrees higher than that, if the threat is a real threat. If the threat is a threat that would be so great that it means that what you're doing is self-protection. One of the other reframes that I tried to apply to it to stop myself from going mad with all the questions I was getting from people, and I was like, God, this actually is quite confusing, is self-protection should only ever be considered to be a desperate struggle for survival. Anything else is either posturing, the projection of your ego, of marketing yourself, if you like, in the world, in society, as a tough person, whatever that may or may not mean, machismo, or a civilian who is engaging in control and restraint of somebody who is being unruly. So there's those three things. That machismo thing, that's illegal, but it's outside the realm of self-protection, because if you're not forced to fight in a desperate struggle for survival, it's not self-protection. Or a civilian who is trying to apply control and restraint in a scenario where somebody is being unruly. So, and that, if you think about it, there are different scenarios there, aren't there? There's one scenario where a guy has broken into your house at 5 o'clock in the morning and he has a knife, and he's saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. And then you basically have no reason to believe that his intention is not to murder you. He's not there to threaten you, he's there to do serious harm. So the level of violence which you could apply in response to that scenario would be high. You could even potentially, legally beat him to death. But you would have to it would still have to fall within reasonable force, and then that would be sorted out in a court of law, where they would say, well, once you'd knocked him to the floor and you'd stamped on his head and he'd gone unconscious and he'd dropped the knife and you'd picked the knife up, did you then have to go and tie him up and take him down to the basement and saw his arms and legs off? No, you didn't. That's not reasonable force. So you use the minimum. Reasonable force in the UK is the minimum force required to stop the threat, but it is also a legal precedent within the UK, and I'm not going to remember to paraphrase this judge's words exactly, but I do remember this phrase. There was a judge who ruled in England, and it is a legal precedent here, that it is not for you as a civilian to weigh to a nicety the precise amount of force to be used. So you don't, in the middle of a fight, have to be going, oh no, that might damage his eyes. He may not see out of that eye. As you're frantically hitting him, trying to get him to drop the axe with which he just murdered the milkman. You don't have to weigh to a nicety. Weigh as in W-E-I-G-H, weighing something up to a nicety. There's a quaint old English phrase that means to a specific and delicate amount. You just beat the fuck out of him until he's not moving, or not until he's not moving. Good Lord, I'll get myself in trouble. Until brains are coming out of his nose, until he seems to have stopped, and then you can stop and you can walk away. So this whole thing is difficult. It's really, really tricky, because that's one scenario. Then you have another scenario, which would be two guys peacocking in a pub or a dance club, and because it's actually, and that's more to do with sex. That's got way more to do not that they want to have sex with each other necessarily. That could be the underlying cause. They just really, really want to have sex with each other, but they can't, so they just chest bump and punch each other instead. But more frequently, and for the majority of cases, that's about a primal biological monkey dance to show who has the highest value DNA, whose sperm would be of more desirability to the available females in the environment, even though consciously those two guys probably don't know that. And that's that scenario. That's illegal. I don't think any court in the land is going to go, yeah, you totally needed to show that douchebag who had the bigger dong. So we're really glad that you glassed him. Well done, you. You've got to justify your actions. That's the kind of thing that self-protection instructors have been saying since day one. You should avoid that at all costs, not least because what most self-protection instructors who are any good is going to show you is just too high a level of force for that. If somebody is like fronting up and puffing up and trying to enforce their ego on you, and you're trained, and you're not a lazy bum. You take your training seriously, and you train consistently, and you take care of yourself, and you're fast and you're strong. You're doing your strength training and everything else, and you headbutt a guy a couple of times, maybe stick a finger in his eye, and then choke him. You will potentially do a huge, way more damage than maybe even you realize if you're a nice civilized person who doesn't get into fights, against somebody who even though he looks scary and he has the tattoos and all that, and he's got the attitude, and he's had 6 bottles of Heineken and a Jaeger bomb, and a couple of lines of dodgy Coke, so he's up for it. You might think, well, he's clearly really hard and has been not necessarily. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes guys like that, you get inside of them and you give them a few decent shots and they'll just fall apart. So, and you can really do damage. You could really do very, very serious damage to somebody very, very quickly if you're taking your combative training seriously. So that's to be avoided. Then you have the whole civil control issue, which is probably one of the worst, because say, for example, you're in a hotel and the people in the hotel, you're with your wife, may God bless my eternal soul, and there's people kicking off in the room next door. And they're kids, like 21, 22, 23. And she says, okay, you need to go and stop them. And you're like, well, it sounds like people from 5 different rooms, 10 people have gone into that room, and now they're playing out their favourite scenes from the WWE. So it's not just a case of just walking up to them and going, hey, you little punks, you're only 22. I'm a grown man, so I'm going to tell you what's up now. Situations like that they don't always, but they can turn ugly. They can get really, really nasty really, really quickly. Bunch of kids graffitiing at a bus stop, you go over and say, hey, don't do that, or whatever it is. It can elevate from a situation of just simple civil unrest, civil disobedience, what we would call in the UK disturbing the peace, where you should just be able to, like, I don't know, stick somebody in an arm lock and then throw them away and go, don't do that again, you naughty little chap, to somebody like getting stabbed to death, or the gang turning feral and turning on one person and giving them a kicking. I told this story before on my old channel. That happened to an uncle of mine, and a group of lads were gobbing off at him and his wife on the way home, and he said something back to them jokingly, and because they were animals, they decided to take it the wrong way, and 6 of them went at him. And initially, because he's still determined that it was a situation of civil unrest or disturbance of the peace and not that serious, he apparently did a play fighting with one of them and picked him up. He's a construction sort of a person, so he's a very slim but very wiry and incredibly strong guy. And he just picked this kid up and threw him and went, ha. And they went berserk, and they really went for him. And in knocking him over, they knocked him over into a lamppost, and the lamppost hadn't been shaved smooth. It had been left sharp where it had come out of the concrete post maker, and my uncle got scalped. They sewed it back on, but it scalped his head and peeled it peeled part of his hairline back. There was a huge scar there. And the next day I walked past this fucking post, and there was a piece of his scalp there. I'm telling you this graphic story because I think it's a really good example of that scenario where simple civil disobedience can turn into a highly dangerous self-protection scenario, and that we as people who maybe work in the security industry, maybe working as doormen or the rest of it, or maybe are just worried about that happening, that's the waters we have to swim in. They're vague, they're ambiguous, and it can go from, this isn't that serious, to holy fuck, this is really serious really quickly. And if you go to your local police force, and it doesn't matter what country you're in, and ask them what you should do in a scenario like that, they're not going to be able to give you an answer, because they know very well that you as a civilian are in a double bind, placed there by a well-meaning society that is capitalized on. It's a loophole that's capitalized on by the criminally inclined, that also many police forces have to struggle with as well. So in the effort to be a good-willed, good-intentioned human being, for example, there's cases where people have called up the fire brigade and said, there's a fire here, the fire brigade has to go out, and then when they arrive, they assault the firemen. Or they shoot at them, as happened in Birkenhead when I was a kid. They were shooting at firemen with air guns, not with like proper guns, but even so, and that's an abuse of civilization. And there is really, at this moment in history in which we live, there is no answer to that abuse of civilized moral standards, because we don't walk around like we're the cast of The Walking Dead with hammers and machetes and guns strapped to us and just waiting for somebody. Like, that would be insane and is completely illegal. You're totally not allowed to do that. So you are stripped of your weaponry, you're stripped of the legal license to do harm, and told, behave lawfully, even when those around you are not, and that you also know very well that the unlawful around you can take advantage of your lawfulness. So this has been a problem. I'm not the first person to say that this is a problem. I don't know who the first person to say that was. It's probably been discussed in various formats and various forums for a long time. What should a civilized person do in response to a threat from an uncivilized person? And to what extent does us being civilized actually weaken us in the arena of pure violence, when it is just a question of, it's now me versus you, and for the sake of argument we'll say there are no weapons involved. That's just who can deliver the most violence the quickest, the hardest, the nastiest, the firstest, right? I don't think anybody would argue with that either. So the reality, that's a sentence that I just said. Oh, it's just about who hits the hardest, the firstest, the nastiest, and does the most violence to the person before the other person can do the violence back. It sounds kind of cool. It's one sentence, it's got a lot of bravado behind it. Sounds great. And you say that and it's like, yeah, man, that's badass. Okay, well, how the fuck are you actually going to do that? How are you actually going to do that? And then that's not even a question of, is your training up to date? Are you fit? Are you strong? Are you practicing these techniques regularly? That's slightly that. But then becomes a question of will. It becomes a question of intent. It then becomes almost a philosophical issue. A whole conversation that you need to have with yourself ahead of time. You can't be having it as it's happening. It needs to have already been sorted out. Where you know that you have a basic but good understanding of the law as it applies to self-protection in your country. And that's not enough. You then actually need to study the law to see how these cases usually go down, and to see how the procedure will be legally for what is likely to happen, what kinds of things you can say, what kinds of things you must never say if you don't want to end up in jail. Because what good is it going to do you to win a fight outside of a kebab shop that maybe you didn't really need to get into, to then end up stuck inside of a prison with only with potentially violent criminals. So in trying to avoid or push away the one thing you didn't want, the potentially violent criminal in your reality, now you're going to be, by the state, is now going to submerge you into a bucket that is just full of violence and criminality. And by all accounts, from everybody I know who's either been to prison or worked in prisons, then the rules of law are really can be altered depending on what type of prison it is and how bad it is. Not all prisons are the same. Obviously, some of them sound quite nice. Some of them sound like training camps. One of my mates, who's been down a couple of times, and every time he goes in, he comes out, he looks great because he trains twice a day. Don't go to prison. It's not clever in prison. Don't take it lightly. It's different in different countries. I mean, I lived in Malaysia for a while, and in Thailand, and I got into some scenarios just through being out drinking. And you've got criminals who'll go to Malaysia to holiday, or not, maybe not Malaysia as much, but Thailand to holiday. And I've thought, what if this goes off? What if there's a scenario here? Do you think the Thai police are going to turn up and give the difference between give a shit about this white guy versus this white guy? Or do you think they're just going to go, these drunk white people all need to get a fucking kicking and shoved in some horrible jail cell? These are the types of things you've got to think about. So this particular concept, thug jitsu, was in reference to this reframe of saying, well, we really can't just be good guys. We really need to know how a criminal, psychopathic, narcissistic, borderline personality disordered megalomaniac thinks, how the criminally inclined person thinks, and how they are operating on a daily basis. And that's a lot of what I look at on the Spartan Life Coach channel is self-protection, but it's protection against emotional and psychological threat from the same people, the same personalities. In this field, where it's the Street Fight Secrets concept, we're more focused on narcissistic, borderline personalities with a very strong antisocial personality order element, also known as being a sociopath or a psychopath, but it's now called in modern psychiatry antisocial personality disorder, who will be violent, who can be sadistic, who do lack impulse control, who do have anger management issues and all the rest of it. So myself and my friends started talking about thug jitsu jokingly, as in what you would do at the mental and physical level if you were modeling the behavior of a criminal, of a career criminal. And then there was like, well, you'd always use deception. You'd never have a fair fight. You'd never have fisticuffs. There would always be an element of deception there, whatever you would do. You would always, you would seek to get your evil imposed on the other person before they even begin to realize that the fight has begun. This kind of thing. And that seemed to work quite well. That resonated with a lot of people. The Thug Jitsu DVD, it was actually back in the days when I was still selling DVDs when that one came out. That was a really, really popular DVD. And it was basically just saying, okay, well, how do we change the frame of this so that we're actually looking at how to just apply violence as ergonomically efficiently as we can in a shorter timeline as we can and inflict as much damage? What would you do? And that's what the Thug Jitsu concept was. The book went more into how would you do that, and what's the mental shift that a human being needs to go from that takes them from prey to predator, from a civilized person to a criminal psychopath. And I'm not saying that like you've got to change your whole lifestyle in order to protect yourself efficiently, but you need, in order to protect yourself efficiently and to have any chance, because your chances are low. If somebody really targets you and you're a decent civilized human being and you don't live the life of a criminal psychopath, the chances are high that they're going to get what they want and they're going to be able to dominate you in that context. Unless you hold back parts of yourself and develop parts of yourself and make ready and have accessible parts of yourself that are just taboo in modern society and in modern civilization. And that is one of the main subjects that I'm going to be covering on this new YouTube channel, this combative psychology channel, is looking at that catch-22, looking at that moral and legal dilemma, and actually looking at, well, how can we then prepare ourselves mentally for the application of raw aggression and violence, and even to look at, everybody knows that receiving violence is traumatic. Being the victim of violent crime or being the victim of even a psychological assault is traumatic. But what's not looked at so much is the trauma that inflicts on you as the person who's delivering that violence. It can have ill effects on your personality. It can change who you are as a person, even if everything goes right. So you can follow all the instructions that your self-protection instructor has given you to the letter, and everything can go down right, and you can effectively win the fight, but still have a multitude of problems after the fact. Because for most civilized human beings, that unmasked interaction with our own primal, animalistic, savage, violent nature is disturbing. It's really, really disturbing. How are you going to go back to, 9 to 5, letting people in when they indicate they want to go in, when you're driving a car, holding doors open, people, all the things we do that are considered to be civilized and polite, that makes us not like animals. And then for that one small space of time that may never happen, hopefully will never happen unless that's your job, you have to be a savage and then come back from being a savage into normal civilized human being again. So that's what I'm going to look at on this channel. That's what I hope to do. So if you have any questions about that, please just ask them in the comment section below. Over the next week, the book Thug Jitsu is available on Amazon for cheap. If you want to get hold of that manual now, just to check it out, you can download the Kindle app to your phone for free. You can go on and you can buy the manual and you can read it off your phone. It's as easy as that. It's available for, I think it's like less than $1. It's like 99 cents. If you leave a positive review for that book over the next week as well, you can go on over to streetfightsecrets.com and you can pick any download you want. Let me know that you've left me a review. Just send me an email, richie@streetfightsecrets.com. Pick a course, say, hey, Richie, I left you a nice review. You said I could have a free thing. I want this course, and I'll send it to you in the mail as a download. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to doing more of these videos again soon. Cheers.